Hello, everybody, and we are live with the remnants of the book club. All of us who are still with us, you're crazy. Thank you for being crazy. I've been wrestling a lot with people and their relationships to emanation. We all know the issue of doing lip service to things, right? And then not take them properly into account. So there's something where without the emanation you don't have a thing, right? And I was talking in the Bible study about how God created land out of the water, right? So he created thingness or isness or something, right? From not isness, from the multiplicity of potential, and it's that's a miracle, right? Like that something exists, that something has an identity, that something can be grounded, um, and without that there is nothing, right? Like you can't have something without it's something giving it what it is, right? Like ultimately that has to come from God, and everybody's like, yeah, but like from my experience, from my solipsistic perspective, right? Like I reach for that, right? So there's something that I'm doing where I'm um I don't know, like I guess you want to say host, but it's more like you drag your guest in, right? It's one of these guys on the street, right? Like these slick guys who want to get people in the nightclub, right? It's like, are you really in the nightclub or are you just there, right? Like, especially the ladies, right? They're like, well, you get a free drink, right? And they're just there to like get the men in, right? Like this, it's like, what is that, right? Like, are you actually partaking in that nightclub if you're going in that manner, right? Or on the other hand, like, do you actually have a club, or do you have like uh, a scam, basically, right? And and so yeah, like there's something in the sincerity of the relationship, right? And I think when you want to get to know the principle, um, you can't reach for it, like because the stretching will mutate what you're experiencing, right? So like you got to let it speak for itself. Um, and the importance of that somehow I cannot communicate to people. Like it's just like, and so my intention is in relation to the call and to the answering of the call, right? Because like when you're called by the principle, there's still something that you need to do, right? But it's not a dialectic, right? It's like a, a call and a response, right? Like it's like it, it's no more a dialectic than someone who's shouting help me," right? And you can't see them, and you're just triangulating towards the noise, right? Like there's a different type of relationship there, and you can't say, well, I emerged into their presence. That's like, no, like I followed their guidance and I reached them. So uh, yeah, that's where I'm coming from. Christopher.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm seeing something similar to that dynamic anyway, because I wrote out here seeing contrast, because especially we're getting into the talking about rainbows. You have there's a clear contrast between heaven and earth, and you can also see the contrast between the space and time elements here with the storm coming in and receding. And so that's kind of what I'm looking at here. Yeah, especially going forward, with that seems to be a lot of what the book is pointing at, where you look at one thing and then you look at the other thing. That's, he phrases them as kind of opposites, whatever, but then you see the contrast between the two, and that's where you notice the third bit of the thing for the symbolism there. Castle.
Yeah. So I actually, I think a lot of us are kind of, and as we're getting kind of close to the end of this, we're kind of, our intentions are getting closer and closer, actually, like these last few weeks. And I think there's something interesting. So my intention this week is acknowledging wrongs, something that's coming up on this page that we're starting on. And this, I think all of our intentions kind of come to just paying attention to things. And so, like if you're receiving a call, then you have to actually, if you are going to answer it, it requires actually paying attention to the fact that you're being called. In order to actually see contrast, you have to be actually looking, and then the same thing with acknowledging wrongs. And I'm thinking of, if you have someone that's like stuck at the bottom of a well or something like that, and somebody calls to them and says, "Hey, can I help you?" And then you're just like, "No, I'm good, I got it." And you're just sitting down there, and it's like, well, the fact that you are in a difficult place and you refuse to acknowledge it, you don't see the contrast between, okay, there's a guy up there that is perfectly fine and I'm stuck down here. He's trying to help, or he's offering to help, and I'm just being obstinate, and for whatever reason, just, I could easily be out of here in like 2 minutes, but I'm just deciding to stay down here. And it's this lack of acknowledgement that, not just oh, I have a problem, but in order to actually have problems rectified, or as we're going to kind of see here, this thing of things being transmuted into a higher good, that in order to do that, you actually have to recognize the thing that needs to be transmuted into a higher good, that it has that potential to do that, or to have that happen to it. And so just kind of thinking a little bit along those lines, and just that, I think also just the importance of the participatory element of paying attention there.
Yeah, so there's a distinction that I make on that, where there's like an intellectual or knowing, where you're like, well, I know this is the case, right? Like, for example, like, I know I'm an asshole, right? But do I really feel that it's the case, right? Like, do I really feel like an asshole, or is it just like, well, yeah, I acknowledge that these logic sequences come to this result. So, um, and the feeling something, you need to feel it, right? Well, you need to feel something in order to be able to change, right? Because when you well, when you don't have attention for things, then like you can't react to them, right? And even if you have attention for them, like that doesn't make you able to change them for the good. So I was make having this example where you're just on a walk with someone, and you're walking in this beautiful forest, right? Like you're walking with God, and then there's a river, right? And you just always cross that river, right? Because like that's what you do, because that's what the path requires, right? And the person that you're with is like, there's a river, right? Like I can't go across this river, like whatever. Rivers are dangerous, or I can't leave the land behind, or whatever the reason is, right? And now you're stuck with that person, right? It's like, yeah, but we're on this walk, right? Like why can't you come to this side? So I've been kind of like debating, well, like, how do you answer that, right? Because like the communion breaks down at that point, right? Like you can say, well, I'll just go back and stand with them until they are able to cross the river somehow. But like you don't know why the river is a problem, right? Because you're just like, oh, I'm just crossing the river, like like who cares, right? And and so yeah, like it's interesting, right? To know, like, well, and you can even have the case, right? Like you're like miles up front and you look behind and it's like there's no one there. And it's like, but what was the thing that made the other person stop, right? Like, was it the hill? Was it was it the forest or was it the river? Like, I don't know. So like identifying what the problem is and the way in which it is a problem, right? Because like the river is not a problem in itself, right? Like the relationship to the river is a problem. And like, yeah, if you're in a wheelchair, right, like that's a different problem than that you or have a fear for water, right? So there's, and they require completely different solutions. And like I was thinking, right, with the call and the answer, right, and like sitting down and refusing the help, right? Like sometimes we don't recognize the help for help, and sometimes we don't recognize that we're in a well. Like we're just like, no, this is my house. Like, what are you talking about? Like, I live here, bro. Uh, so yeah, let's get to it, so that we get to the end of it. So we were doing the rainbow thing. Um, I was actually thinking about that we bow ourselves, um, which is like, it's like bending your will to the other will, like to the higher will in some sense, right? So I think thinking about it in will bending terms is maybe also enlightening in a manner. Do we have something to say about this?
I don't think so.
I think the
Like,
only thing I was just reflecting a little more on the thing of the idea of rainbow as bridge, and also like my suggestion that I'm seeing the rainbow as like an icon, that you're able to reference this thing. It's an actual phenomenon, like you're actually experiencing it. It's really there. But it is, and it's in reference to something, but it's also not just statically there. Like there's a reason, like it was intentionally put there for the reason of connecting through it and beyond it. And so just kind of using that, sort of within the context of like stained glass or something like that would be kind of like a human rectification of the indoor problem, I guess. And being able to kind of see through see through the obstacle and still kind of get to the other side of the cloud or the obscurity. So just something about that of just kind of like bridges by way of like, I don't know, references or something like that.
So that's really interesting because now I'm thinking about stained glass windows, right? And a window, especially the ones in the church, they're up high, right? So they're actually facing heaven. And through the window, right, like you get an image of heaven, right? Like the stained glass is literally an image of heaven, right? Like they're capturing something of heaven and letting that shine upon you, as opposed to having the wholeness and thereby the confusedness of heaven shine, right? And um, I wanted to honor Christopher's intention, right? So there's like the contrast of time and space, right? And then straight and crooked, right? Which is a relationship to truth, right? So that would be above that or something, or that would be the thing that's shared, like so familiar and foreign would be still within something shared, right? Because like if you're not something shared, you're separated, right? So that you're not in relation. Um, Rational and irrational. Uh, yeah, I don't know about that one. Revealed and hidden. So Marcus just revealed after he was hiding out. And so this is having to do with sight, right? And things being lit in general, right? And lit for you as well, right? Like those two are different aspects. True and false is in relationship to a standard, right? And good and bad is in relationship to adherence to the principle, I guess. Or no, good and bad is related to purpose, I think. Someone has to speak up on this one. Anyway, now we're getting to this image. So the first thing we have to notice is the arrows, right? So they're all coming together in the rainbow. And I had this idea for the book because like not all the arrows have the same type of relationship, and I think it would have been useful to distinguish between the arrows apart from direction, like give them qualities or something. So I wanted to say that here, like the cursing of the ground for humanity's sake, right? So that's the conditional, or Mark was pointing at that as the layer of relevance or something, right? Or and then and the imagination of man's heart is evil from his youth, right? So that's like an establishment or something, right? Or a proclamation. So like now, from now on, we know that's the case, and we're just gonna have to take that as the baseline. Does anybody want to add anything there?
I think just to the top sentence below the quote there, this thing of I think just for the folks at home, I want to mention it says that evil is inherently part of humanity. Doesn't necessarily mean like built into from the very beginning, but inherent is something like a stammering or a hesitation or a being stuck in. So it's this thing of that humanity is stuttering in evil or has like stepped in evil and is now stuck in a certain sense. So I think just to kind of clarify that there's certain mindsets that people take on that I think are important to address there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and he's using the word imagination, right? So he's not describing man's heart, but like something that man's heart is reaching for. Mm. Right. So there's a distinction between the heart itself and its result, right?
Yeah, and it's good to point out that you do inherit things, like, right? And it's weird because the genetics and the evolution believers constantly pick and choose which things are inherited and which things are not. Nobody notices that, but actually they very much play the no, these are inherited things and these are definitely not, and which is no evidence for their particular parsing of that. And so it's a connection to the past, and it's that connection that's often denied. And it is a three-way connection in that way that you mentioned, Manuel, which is to say, your imagination contains evil. You are the arbitrator or the mediator of whether or not that evil is manifested in the world. And that is the struggle, right? That is the struggle that you have, that you inherited from original sin, right? And so the resolution, in some sense, to original sin is your behavior, not your imagination, right? But also, if you focus your imagination too much on sinful things, the odds that you will sin go up. And that's why pointing in the real world is important, and keeping people out of their heads so that they're not constantly trying to self-transcend or some other ridiculous thing that is impossible. Keeps all of that keeps the world a better place. It's important to point towards the higher ideal, even though it may be unattainable or seemingly unattainable, because that three-way relationship exists between the inheritance of the evil of the imagination and the manifestation of the evil that you could do if you focused on it too much, or if you focused on it, in a positive fashion or whatever, right? And that's also, again, the statement of the struggle that you have. You have a struggle by virtue of your birth, which is a gift, right? Which is a blessing that was bestowed upon you by the grace of creation. And the way to honor that blessing is to struggle against your inheritance, the evil aspect of your inheritance that is contained within your imagination. And another way of thinking about this is, if you think you can't or don't know evil, it's right there in your imagination. And so you need to look there first anyway. So you should look there first. And then once you see it in yourself, it should be easier to see it in the world, because you'll have an internal to external contrast. And that's the proper way, in my opinion, to engage with these things. But this idea of the three-way relationship is always in these three arrows, right? And the directionality as such definitely matters a great deal, right? Because the rainbow is the culmination or the combination or the proper union of flooded land, dry land, and God in this case, right? And that's important to understand in terms of your relationship in the world, right? Because you don't get the option of flooded or dry land, but you do get the mediation of it through the rainbow when that grace comes down upon you from above, is emanated upon you.
So I want to say, like, there's God is talking about that the dry land, right, um, of humanity, right, is never going to get flooded again, right? So he's making a separation, right? Like he's making a separation between the flood or the floodable and the unfloodable, right? And he's connecting that to us as humans. And so you can see the rainbow as something that connects the unfloodable to the flooded, right? Like there's a way where this invisible boundary or something, right? Like needs to, like like it needs to be connected, right? Like things out of the sea need to enter the land, right? And we need to be able to fish, all these things, right? And so I was comparing it last time with a gate, right, in the city wall, right? So that may be a good way to think of it. And Mark had this video about I don't even know what it was called, but like basically rivers or water flowing, and they were talking about dams, and like it's like God created, like he built a dam to keep out the water, right? But like it's also holding back potential, right? So, and then there's a way in which it can rain into into the land, right, and be fresh water, right, and participate in growing things in the land. um and you can see, like, because the rainbow is also connected to rain and stuff like that, right, where you could say, right, like that rain is like a measured way of flooding, right? Like it's not overflowing. It's like taking a shower, right? Like you're not putting yourself in a bath, but you're just exposing yourself to enough water to fulfill its purpose, which is cleaning you.
It's like a stopgap or something like that, where it's like, oh yeah, okay, you're going to start like flattening, the like the separation of the waters, like that's going to happen. But right at a certain point, there's this thing that's going to kind of keep the, almost like having like a door jam or something like that. It's like, okay, it's going to stop right about here, and it's not gonna go any further than that. Uh, I like also, like, I think this sentence there is really important. It's as part of humanity, which means a certain degree, to Mark's point, of wrong must be acknowledged for its perfection. A certain degree, not all of it, right? But also not optional that you do acknowledge some of it, and that it's for the purpose of its perfection that you're acknowledging it. You're not acknowledging it so that you can, dilly dally, just hanging out with it or something like that, because then you just wind up getting yourself muddy, you know. But just kind of actually realizing, okay, there is in fact an issue here. In order to rectify it, I have to actually attend to it and then start cooperating with whatever's available to do that.
And acknowledge is a really interesting word, right? Because like when you walk like past uh, uh, something, right, and you acknowledge someone, you like give it a nod, right? But you don't stand still. You don't you don't interrupt what you're doing. You're just saying, okay, like I know you're there.
Well, it's ignore, acknowledge, engage, right? If you want to put it in three parts, right? So there's ignoring by walking past, right? There's acknowledging, right, as your excellent example, right? But then there's engaging, which would be stopping, and right. And so there's nothing wrong with acknowledging the drug addict. There's something wrong with ignoring the drug addict, and there might be something wrong with engaging the drug addict. And so you have to know that there's a difference between those three things, and have the discernment, not the knowledge, but the discernment, to do the right thing in that situation. And it's not never ignore, and it's not always acknowledge, and it's not always engage or never engage, right? That's why there's three options. It's a difficult set of circumstances, because you can't take any one of them and exclude or include them in and of themselves. Their discernment is required to know what to do in that situation. And this is why knowledge doesn't help, because without discernment, knowledge is completely useless to you.
Yeah, and I think the three things that you're talking about, right? Like when you engage in them, you have a different level of responsibility, right? Like you need a different level of discernment. And like when you start engaging with something, like you should be equipped to handle that situation. Because if you're engaging with something without being equipped, like you're just gonna ask for trouble. Like,
yeah, you don't want to bite off more than you can chew, right? Or take on more than you're able to take on. And that's very much, we'll say, the problem of today. If you want to know why Jordan Peterson sort of stalled out, or people see him as sliding back or whatever, it's because he's trying to take on more than his tools have access to. And you see that with, like, when you see people flare up or burn out on the internet, that's usually what it is. They've taken on more than they can handle, and they've engaged too deeply or something, and they don't have the discernment to know that, and now it's too late. It's too late, and they blow up. And yeah, and you're right, Manuel. The difference is the level of responsibility you're prepared to take, which is somewhat a function of your competence, somewhat a function of your experience, somewhat a function of your ability, somewhat a function of your skill, because ability and skill are different, and a function of your capacity. And a capacity, yeah, there's time, there's energy, there's attention, right? Those are all capacity issues, and these are not easy things to resolve. There's no formula for it, for example, and you can't make one. So don't try. You have to be able to have a sense for those things, because it is sort of important in terms of your interaction in the world, which is not optional. Like, you're going to interact with the world.
and one thing is important to notice, that Peterson and people like that, right? They're trying to affect change on a level that they can, right? So they either want to change something in themselves or in others, right? And then they get frustrated, right? And then they're like trying to look for reasons, and then you just end up in this goose chase instead of recognizing like I shouldn't have engaged. I should just acknowledge the truth of this and sucked it up and attended to something where it can be fruitful.
That that's reminding me somewhat of Moses, which came up earlier in the book, where it's like his first attempt at mediating between or for his people was to kill an Egyptian guy, and then because of that, he ended up going out into the desert, spend several years, raising sheep. Then he comes back and leads the people out, does all his stuff, and then at the end, he ends up hitting the rock instead of just speaking to it and not being allowed to enter the promised land with everybody else. Just sort of the different ways of attempted mediation that are recorded there.
Yeah, and that connects to what I highlighted, right? So it's that which led to their death, right? So like some actions lead to certain places. And like we were actually praying about God's vengeance. I was like, yeah, sometimes what you do, you'll get vengeance. Like the boomerang will return, and it will return hard. And yeah, like so, Adam and Eve got led to their death, and yeah, you gotta also see, right, like that they were led to that place changed the game, right? So now you have a new reality to relate to. So this picture about the knowledge of good and bad, right? Like I actually think that these are talking about kind of perspectives, right? So there's a way of looking at the tree that leads to death, and there's a way of looking at the tree that leads to goodness, right? And then there's a way of looking at the tree as the thing that puts you in either goodness or badness. And well, we were having a Twitter interaction where we're talking about the relational, right? And so like what is a perspective, right? Like a perspective is establishing a relationship to the tree, right? And like, is that a relationship that's fruitful, right? That's going to feed you, that's going to sustain you, or is that a relationship that will, yeah, like poison you, like kick you out of the garden, right? Because you're trying to wield it as a tool, right? Or you're engaging with something that's way larger than you, right? Like that can't be related to from your perspective, for example, right? So like you can never get a good grasp on it. And maybe we can connect this to like the level of, right? Like if you're not on the right level and you're relating to the thing, then the effect of that relationship is going to act out differently.
Yeah, I think the easiest way to look at this is to say both relationships can be right. The difference is that when your final cause is the knowledge of good and bad become manifested as material, tree of death and tree of life. And that means the intersection is uncertain, which traps you in that way of being, right? Whereas if your final cause, your telos, is the tree of life, you're not actually moving the material. This is why he calls it a meta tree of life, which I still somewhat disagree with, but whatever. It's his word. It's his book. It's not a material. It's already up above in the non-material realm, we'll say, right? But it does allow you to transcend bad and good, right? Which is, your point was to know bad and good, right? Which is a type of having mode, if you want to go with Vervikian language, right? But the way out of that having mode to go, quote, meta, if you want to stay within Vervaeke's terrible frame, using terrible words, is to and be able to transcend, right, is to have that final cause of Tree of Life. And another way of saying that is to say, if you're pointed at something like ethics or morals or the way of knowing good and bad, rather than being pointed at the principle that being is good because it emanates upon you from the tree of life, then you won't be able to transcend good and bad. You'll be trapped within them because you're trying to have them, you're trying to possess them through knowledge, right? Knowledge is a materialization through propositions for most people, unfortunately, rather than trying to find your place, which would solve your domicide issue, in connecting with the tree of life by transcending good and bad. And so even though the relationships look the same and the perspective seems identical, the end result is very different because the telos or the final cause is very different. And that, I think, is the most useful thing you can get out of looking at it this way, is realizing that the final cause actually changes the quote nature. I have to get sloppy, unfortunately. The nature of the things that you're looking at fundamentally.
I would say maybe the proper telos is like knowing God through a participation rather than knowing good and evil through like propositional knowledge and trying to be equal with God through that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I remember seeing this diagram and immediately thinking, because it's that thing, like you look at icons and stuff, and it's just like, oh, like yeah, you just look at the diagram and stuff. But I remember looking at at this diagram on the right, and I was like, oh, that's actually like literally part for part the image of divine mercy. Like that's like that icon. It's exactly the same thing. So it's literally, let me see if I can line that up. So it's actually also a rainbow, right? You have the left side, death and rebirth. You've got the right side, righteousness, right? It's representing a New Testament flood, and it's actually emanating light, which is referencing that. It is also an icon, and you literally have the triangular sort of imagery there. And I was just like, oh yeah, this is like actually every single element in this diagram is right there. And that participation that you literally just described is actually the entire point of that icon.
Yeah, I was gonna include a couple things, right? So like this week, goodness was described to me as a quality of love. I was like, oh, and the second thing that I was focused on is that the Orthodox they're talking about that in Christianity, truth is a person, right? And so, like, what is this personhood? Well, like a personhood is a relationship over time, right? Like in a specific expression that has a nature to it, right? And there's the problem with the goodness, right, is like if you reduce it instead of having it as a way of being, right, as an expression, as a participation, you end up not having the quality, right? because the quality is something that's lived out, right? Like it's something that's manifested through your participation, in your participation, right? And if your participation is true love, right, then the goodness can find expression in that manner, right? And so like uh, that requires a certain personality, right? Like that requires a certain character, um, that well, like looks at certain things, right, and acknowledges certain things and ignores certain things. And if you have that relevance realization correctly, right, and you map that properly on your agency, right, and through your humility, you know when you're going beyond or you're actually capable, then that's where you get that meta, right? Or like better yet, like the image of Christ that you were having on icon.
Mhm.
So it's interesting that Matthieu uses the word cause, right? So like Adam and Eve's sin led to their downfall, and he's using cause here. So like there's like obviously things that lead to other things are in some sense causal, right? But they're more like responsible as opposed to a direct cause of something. But it's interesting that that contrast is used here. So in this part,
just real quick, Manuel, I would push back on evil plight because I'm not sure that's necessarily warranted from the Book of Job. But Jess is not here to help us. Maybe I'll ask Jess since he was on my live stream last night. I'll ask him if he would characterize what happened to Job as an evil plight. In some sense, it is, right, because it's basically the devil that does it, right? But I mean, this is the God can turn not will, by the way, but can. And in this case, since God's kind of the cause in some sense, he's responsible, and so he does this, turn evil into good, or evil plight into goodness. But I don't know if the result. I don't know if a test, if a test is an evil plight, because it is a test, right? It's explicitly a test. It's not a test. We'll say it's not only a test of Job, right? It's a test of God's statement, right? And so that's like, because my question would be, can a test be evil? And that's why I'm saying I want to push back on that a little bit, right? But there's two senses of the word evil, and so if you go with, well, this comes straight from the devil, and therefore it's evil. These are actions straight from the devil, and therefore are axiomatically evil. Yes, but also they're not evil in the other sense of the term, right? Because God approves of it effectively and fixes it later, right? And it's the purpose of it is a test, and it's not aimed at Job either, right? He just happens to be the element in the test. It's not like, it's not, he didn't do anything, right? Job's not the cause. His actions are not the cause. The test is the cause, right? The bet is the cause, not him. And that's why, because there's a question in my mind as to whether or not God would make this good, would have turned it around if it had been Job's fault, because I think he wouldn't have. He would have said, consequences, bro. But that's me inferring a bunch of things from the story. But yeah, I did want to sort of differentiate sort of the two senses that we have for the term evil, because I think that's actually relevant here.
I would probably separate evil plight and downfall as not being necessarily descriptors. In order to kind of, just for the folks at home and reading through this text and preserving it, I think the downfall itself is the test, and it contains, like, I'm thinking of the fact that he couldn't sleep because he was being tormented all night. Like, that's an evil plight. It was permitted, and it was an element of the test, right? But the test itself, to your point, and the downfall is not it isn't itself evil, but there is something inherently evil about the fact that he was being tormented, and what was tormenting him.
Implementation is evil, right? Because the implementation is from the devil, right? So that's what I'm trying to differentiate, because that's People have a hard time differentiating that. I mean, I have a hard time differentiating that. Like everybody's a hard time differentiating that, right? The fact that this isn't actually aimed at you, but you're still wrapped up in it or involved. And that, look, I mean, things that affect you. And as a pragmatist, I can say, who cares where they come from? Fair enough, right? But it does matter what you do about it. And this is actually the story of Job, is like, no, how you handle this matters, not why it happened, right? Because Job's like, well, I'm fairly sure I didn't do anything wrong, but even if I did, I'm not going to handle it any differently, right? And it's like, well, fair enough. Like, talk about sticking to your principles, Job. You go, bro. And it just so happens that he was right, and in his correctness, he had to question, why has this happened to me? And it's interesting, too, to note that to the best of my understanding, he never gets an answer. So the things that the reader knows from the narrator, the character does not know from the narrator. He has no idea it was a test based on a bet. He never finds that out. And it's not important, because it works out in the best possible way that such a thing having happened can work out. And it's that time component that everybody is tripped up on. Like, why go through all this trouble? Because time's real. That it's not that. You don't have to. It's not a metaphysical point. Things happen, and the world happens. Sorry.
So
I think also just there is the thing of, even if he did have the answer, or like if he had access to the narrator beforehand, like what difference does that really make? I mean, we literally see that, like, you know, the apostles running away, and it's like, oh, like right before they run away, it's Satan has demanded to sift you like wheat. They didn't get it. Like they were explicitly told you're about to be tested, and like they didn't understand.
Well, and the point of Job very much is the foreknowledge of what was going to happen should not have an effect on how you behave. Like, that's actually the point of the story. His knowledge is irrelevant in that particular type of knowledge, is irrelevant in that particular situation. The knowledge of what you did and didn't do, and the knowledge of your principles and your ability to stand by them, is the whole point. Well, one of the points of the story. I don't know why I said the whole point. That's me falling into verbal traps. It's one of the points of the story, is that the knowledge is irrelevant, and he never gets the knowledge. Ever. There's no point that he gets the knowledge, and so that this is to kind of tell you, knowledge ain't the thing, so cut it out, right? Which is very much a message I try to send everybody all the time, even though it doesn't work. Oh well.
I was going to say that there's some guy somewhere who keeps saying that more information won't help. You know,
that guy sounds like a genius. You should listen to everything he has to say forever.
So Job does get some kind of knowledge, right? Like he gets the knowledge that he's a lot smaller than God and shouldn't try. That's the knowledge that he does get.
Yeah, he gets a humbling, right? In it's weird, right? In one sense, he never loses faith, right? But he does lose trust.
Yeah.
And I think that's actually the difference, is that his faith is never shaken, all the way down to, like, listen, man, if, like, just unmake me, right? Like, just do away with me so that I wouldn't ever have been. That would be better. And so another message in there is, no, it wouldn't, because being is good, right? And so the being, just your being, even if your being comes to nothing at the end of it, because you don't get married and you don't have kids, or you get married and have kids and everybody leaves you and all your kids die, it's still good that you were a being. And that goes back up to the meta tree of life. Being is good is the starting axiom. It's really important. If you have a different starting axiom, you're completely screwed. Like, you need to start from being is good. And that's another message that's very clear, I would say, although some people don't read well, have low reading comprehension, but it's very clear from the story of Job, is more information won't help. Having information up front won't help, even if it's the right information. And being is good, man. And that's why you can't be unmade. And it also, again, I think exemplifies the difference between trust and faith, right? Because he doesn't have trust that being is good. but he has faith in God at the same time. And that's the connection between trust and faith is something everybody, including myself, struggles with all the time. And I struggle more in explaining it, I hope, than I do in acting.
But I have an inversion of that, I think, right? Because there's people who stop believing in God, right? So they lose faith, but they keep going to church, right? So this
right, like, right. They're not connected in the way people think they are, but they're also not what people think they are. And trying to explain the difference propositionally turns out to be, if not completely, actually impossible. Damn close to it. I have but you're right, Manuel, and that's a good contrast, because hopefully it helps people see that they are very different and what that difference might be, at least in relation to your participation. And sometimes the trust, it bridges the faith, and sometimes the faith bridges the trust. And I think, again, Job sort of is an example of faith bridging trust.
And that's actually maybe a good way to look at Job, right? So like his temple got destroyed, right? Like his house is the sacred place, right? Like his family got destroyed, and then his body got destroyed, right? Like all of these places where you would harbor, they get removed from him, right? So like he has no place to commune with God. It's like everything has been taken from him. And so I wanted to point a bunch of things out on this, right? So like Matthieu is really insistent about using good and bad, right? You can see it on the picture. So it's curious that he's using evil here. And I also think that the thing that you guys have been dancing around is the distinction between materiality and spirit, right? Like, so what materially occurred to Job is one thing, right? Like he got everything removed, but spiritually, what occurred to him is that you can see it as God, his father, right? And he's like, no, my son can handle this, right? And like he's like never losing trust in his son, right? And so like when you're trusting your son, like you will let him go through stuff, right? Like and this is just like the ultimate version of that, right? Like in some sense, Mary had that ultimate version on the human side as well, by the way. And you can look at it as like a general, right? Like, so if a general tells a soldier, yeah, you go to that point, you're going to be under fire for 5 weeks and you'll probably die. Is that general evil? Because like because God effectively did the same thing, right? Like I'm going to allow you to be exposed to danger, like, and you'll get close to death. And like, is that an evil thing to let that happen to people? I don't think so. But it has to be justified, right? And the justification was this interaction with the devil, right? Like, and yeah, talking about justification, like people don't do that anymore. Oh yeah, so I wanted to talk about this distinction, right? So he's talking about nature agreeing, right? So like this actually maps onto the conversation that we were having on Twitter as well, where it's like how much does the emanation dictate, right? And like is nature like how does nature get to the emanation, right? Like that's kind of the big question, right? And like I do think that this nature agreement, right? Like maybe you can look at it, but there's two sides, right? Like there's willful agreement, right? Where nature just says, okay, like what you put on me, I want to take on. And then there's taming, right? Like nature gets tamed, and when you tame nature, you put it in a hold, right? And like it will give in at a certain point, like it will just give up resisting. And like that kind of happened to Job, I guess, right? Like he just like, okay, I'll surrender, bro. Like, and in his surrender, he found himself again. Um, so yeah, like I do think that this artificial uh, correction can happen in two manners, right? In a masculine, imposing manner, like taming, and in a more seductive manner where you're leading in. Um, so I was thinking about the opposition that he's making of renewal and rectification, right? And it's like the rectification needs to take the renewal into account, and the renewal needs to respect the rectification, and only then they can come together in harmony, right? In be crowned.
Yeah, I don't know that that's an opposition. I mean, he's got three objects, so right, it's the combination of the two things that creates the third thing, right? And the third thing is how the two things are, we'll say, properly combined. And the interesting thing about this is that uh, it might even be the first time. So rectification has a straight arrow work, and rest and renewal has a squiggly arrow, and that's actually ends up being really important symbolically, because you see the difference between the straight and the squiggly all the time in the diagrams, as the book goes on. But there's a significance to that, and the fact that the rectification of the straight and the squiggly is tied up in the rainbow, I think is important. And also you'll notice that the arrows from the flood and the arrows from the dry land are gone, right? In that third thing, in that I guess it's a whole created from the two parts, we'll say. And this is another example of the whole being greater than the sum of the parts.
A silly example that's coming to mind for me is like gift wrapping like a Christmas present or something like that. You know, where it's like, well, you got the box, right? And then you have the ridiculous pattern, you know, that goes over, and then maybe like a bow, and that's all tied up and everything like that. And then you have this kind of there's also something there's something special about the unification of those things and what the contents are of those things and it's also you only do that when participating in a particular holiday as well. Whether it's a birthday, and like there's different types of participations in that depending on which holiday that is. Whether that's a particular person's birthday or if it's Christmas or something like that. So just kind of like a practical, like everyday type example or every year type of example.
Yeah. So the rainbow is crowning the mountain there, right? And it's only crowning the top of the mountain, right? So it's like an iceberg, where half of it or most of it is below the surface, right? And the thing that's on top of the surface, well, an iceberg is actually a good example, right? Because like the top of an iceberg never gets flooded because it floats. Right? So when it becomes smaller, like it will still have something that is dry on top. um and so yeah, like this heavenly covering, um the crown, like the establishment of like a crown, so something above it, right? Like and that is in the form of a rainbow at this level of analysis. um and you can also see it as, because the question is, right, like I don't know how intentional it is, but in the picture, it's actually not reaching the water. There's a little bit of land that can be flooded, and so you can also see it as it's like the holies of holies, right? Like there's something sacred that cannot be. Well, it's different than the other land, right? It's set apart by its grounding. It's like a throne room as well, right? Like you can just make all the analogies there, and to reference back to the rivers flowing from the mountains, right? Like it's also a way by which from the top things can go into the water, right? Like through the land, right? Like that's also important. Like the land gets exposed before it reaches the sea.
And I think it's appropriate as well that you have the rainbow crowning the mountain. Like the entire mountain is crowned, even if it's not actually all completely surrounded. That even if that lowest layer is even submerged in water, the mountain, it's still the mountain and it's still crowned.
Yeah, this is kind of reminiscent of his other diagram where the he has the the white dot and the gray dots and the water and the black dots underneath whatever, and then at the top he has the thing where it's like space crowned by time.
Yeah, and I wanna just sort of put out there that this is an easy representation in the middle here of, we'll say, the proper role of emanation and emergence, right, in terms of things like renewal and time, right? Because there is a renewal inside the box and outside the box through the ornamentation, right? So one way to think about the ornamentation might be the glory of God, constantly renewing, everything, right, inside the box. And then there's a renewal inside the box that doesn't get outside, right, but is pointed up, right, because it's in the rainbow. And you'll also notice that the rainbow representation has been split apart. The representation of the colors is in the triangle in the mountain, and the bow is now crowning that mountain, right? And like all of this is significant. I know it's a lot, right? But it should just fold together. Like there's no reason to like go into it deeply, right? It should just fold together based on all the things you've already engaged with earlier in the book.
I actually really like that point of the sort of spectrum now being represented on the conical part. It's very useful, I think, for understanding like the code of many colors. The other thing, you have sort of the integration that's happening there, and also the fact that he's kind of the integration guy in that story.
So I also want to bring up the idea of a dam, right? So like the water level within, right, is supposed to be regulated in some sense, right? So that it doesn't go too high or too low, right? And thereby the renewal that is taking place within, right, is separated from the cycle from the outside, right? So you might, yeah, I'll just not go into my examples there. And I also need to point out, right, like God is talking about remembrance, right? So a remembrance is not a renewal, right? It's a re-establishment or reaffirmation of what is established, right? And that has a renewing quality, right? Because you're removing the kinks in some sense, right? Or you're straightening it again, right? But it's not the same as a renewal, right? Like, because a renewal would be like an emergent quality, while this is an emanating a rectification.
Yeah, I think the only other comment I have for this one is, of course, in the footnote, because when would it not be? But just to kind of to add on to your mention earlier, Manuel, about that. Did you said something like Mary's participation was kind of like the fullest version of Job's, and you have this thing of being kind of like stuck in flooded land, kind of losing everything essentially, and then kind of having it restored to you. And but I'm kind of associating that along with this footnote, just with like the titles of like Star of the Sea or Pearl of Creation or something like that, and this thing of like being submerged, and then also just kind of relating that to Job's kind of complete restoration, not just in the like materially he gets restored, but then also there's kind of even in the temporal perspective, there's the implication of the restoration and memory of everything that he lost previously. So it's like a doubling. It's like a heaven and earth sort of doubling.
Yeah, well, he gains something, right? He gains a relationship with God that he didn't have before.
Right. And that connects everything he lost plus everything he's gaining.
And he's gaining an appreciation for it. Like maybe
Right.
that's the thing that we're missing, right? Like this test is also a blessing because it affords appreciation, right? Because now to go to Christopher's intention, like contrast, right? Like you've gained the contrast as a result of the test.
Yeah.
And this goes also into like, do you feel right, or do you like do you know it through experience, right, or do you just know of it, right? Like, do you know it logically? Do you acknowledge the logical sequence, or do you acknowledge your state of being, effectively?
It's like realization. I think it was that guy from a couple hundred years ago, Father Cajetan, had a whole thing where he was like, okay, yes, you believe this thing, and you say that you believe this thing, but have you realized it yet? Like, do you actually? It's one thing to say that you believe it. It's another thing to behave as though it's true, but have you actually realized it yet? And it's like, I think a lot of people haven't.
Your realization is to make real. And reality is the thing that we share, right? And things that we don't share are fantasy. And that's a lot of people don't understand that and don't want to believe that, right? So, like, we may play the same video game, but actually, that's fantasy, right? It's not real, even though it's the same video game, because we didn't play the same game, because we're not the same people, right? And so there's a reality to having wasted your time playing the same video game. It doesn't mean that it's real as in your direct experience with that video game, because you can't share it with other people. And things that you can't share don't not have an impact on you in particular, right? Of course, you're impacted by them, but that doesn't make them real, and it doesn't make them shared enough to qualify. And I think, people just struggle with that concept.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times, like, it's totally possible to fantasize about very real things, like things that you could easily be doing, but you can choose to fantasize about that instead. And I think also to Manuel's early point, like to just, and I'm also kind of putting a little twist on it, but that's just having an intellectual awareness is not a substitute for actually engaging with something, or again, like realizing it in any sort of way. Like that's something, and I think I mentioned this yesterday when we talked that this thing of you can have access to a very rich intellectual tradition, but ultimately, like if you're only just like inhaling that you actually don't really have anything. Or worse yet, maybe you just have it, like you're just possessing it.
Or you'll choke on it.
Right. Yeah, exactly. It's stuck in your throat. Yeah.
It'll either flood you or flood out other things. And this is like the problem of flood of knowledge is that a flood of knowledge can lead to lesser understanding of more important things. And people don't want to know that either. It's like, well, I hate to break it to you, but Your brain is limited, and if you stuff it with knowledge you cannot use or information you can't engage with, then what's going to happen is your engagement in other areas is going to suffer, and you're never going to know. You're never going to know. There'd be no way for you to. Everybody else might see it, but there's no way that you'll ever see it.
And I think I can connect that to Noah, right? So he's drinking of the wine of the land, right? And it's like the first wine, right? It's not like, oh, we've had generations of wine. No, it's the first wine. And then he uncovers himself, right? So he loosens, right? Like he by imbibing in the thing that he's not familiar with. And like that's kind of what you're doing when you're absorbing all this information, right? Like you're flooding yourself, you're flooding your sense making, your salience gets completely warped, right? And now what are you relating to, right? Like, well, you're relating to a delusion, right? And talking about fantasies, right? There is a true fantasy, and I think that's called a vision, where you're actually extending reality in a truthful manner, and like that is something that you can share. So so the other thing that is happening here, right, is like Matthieu does this thing where he say wine represents the influence of cyclical time, right? Which is correct, right? Like nothing against it, right? But is that its primary meaning, right? Like that's the question, right? Like is that the lens that we should use to look at it, or is it just like, okay, we can look at wine as a cyclical time, right? And then it shows us a bunch of things, right? And these things are different.
Yeah, well, I mean, he's not saying wine represents cyclical time. He's saying it represents the influence of it, right? And the reason for that is because it happens on multiple scales, right? So the first scale that it happens on is we'll say the I don't know what term do I want to use, the global scale, right? In order to make wine, you must employ cyclical time. Like there's right, you have to harvest the grapes at the right time. You have to process the grapes. You have to process them over time, and then they have to sit time wise, right? So that's the in order to make wine, you have to have the influence of cyclical time, and then as you drink wine, how much wine you drink over time affects how the wine impacts you. And so that's why it represents cyclical time, because it's a fractal representation of the influence of time on the grape and on the person imbibing the result of the cyclical time on the grape. And so it is like, in some sense, a perfect representation of cyclical time at least two scales. We could go into more, but I think two is sufficient. And of course, there's always the the aging of the fine wine motif, right? Which is again just you're extending you're increasing the quality of the wine at the expense of time, and that might be a hint, right? Quality requires time. And if you don't understand wine and the influence of cyclical time, then you won't understand quality well, because you'll never understand that quality and time have this relationship. And there's no getting around it, right? And the so-called modern world of the age of gnosis, it's all about tricking or cheating that, because there are exceptions in areas where you can do so. But that seems to be very much the theme, is tricking the quality out of cyclical time or something.
I really like the point about the across time, like increasing the quality across time. But then also you think of people who are trying to reduce the potency of it. You think of people that go out and they drink socially and stuff like that, where they'll go and they'll very slowly sip the thing across time so that they don't raise their blood alcohol content and they don't experience the effects. but they can still have the thing. So they'll take something, and then extend it for like 2.5 hours or something like that for one cup, and then that way they remain unaffected. It's an interesting kind of contrast of those two ways of participating with it.
And you also have don't put new wine in old wine skins, right? So it's also like what holds the wine and its relationship to time and being able to hold things. Yeah, I was wondering about the red. Like, are we seeing that as something that excites, right, or is it something that seduces? Obviously, also there's a relationship with blood. And I made a connection to the wine cup, right? So like the cup brings the influence of wine. So it's like a vessel of that change.
Well, I think this might be a little bit of what we were talking about before of the thing of like acknowledging something and like the degree to which you should be acknowledging it. That you think of an example of maybe a guy that is very experienced with alcohol, or maybe he has a history of alcoholism or something like that. You can kind of see like don't look at it. And when you put your eye in the cup, like you're gonna start going in there. So you get a just kind of it's kind of like a signal curation thing as far as I'm looking at it.
Are you saying the world is attention or something other crazy thing? It's completely something Jonathan Pageau says all the time.
So to connect that to your eyes, right, you will see strange things, right? And so strange things are things from outside of your perspective, right? Things that are foreign that you don't have a good way to have a relationship to, right? And they are bringers of change as well, right? And unwelcome ones usually. um, and then your heart will speak in versions, right? So this it will give voice to the foreign, right? And it will do so without proper grounding, right? So just like the inversions means that you can't really place the things correctly when they come at you, right? And then the wobbly intoxication, obviously, and the being moved, right? And I think the midst of the sea is you not having any. Well, you're like in domicile, and on top of the mast would be like you're still within the principle, but it's moving you everywhere because you're like you're stuck to the thing, and you can't hold on to it, right? Like you can't hold a straight relationship. That yeah. So the inebriation corresponds to symptoms of disease, exile, and flooding, right? And those are like their losses, right? And their loss also is related to the inhibitions. And when you remove inhibitions, then you get exposed to a foreign way of being. So I'm just going back to the dam because like I can. I'll be damned. So when you remove the dam, right, like the water floods in, right, and the stability, right, like the normal that you were having gets removed, and like a new normal establishes, right, with maybe larger riverbeds, or like the river will change its course because like some bedding got flooded, right, and like got taken away, right? So there's a way where this loss of inhibitions um, allows for reorganizing and restructuring, right? But the problem with the alcohol is that this restructuring usually is not under something wholesome. And we can even go to the ayahuasca situation, right? Which is like literally trying to act out this purpose.
Yeah, that goes back to what we said, or what Mark at least was saying earlier about your imagination and how much attention you give, or how much attention or inaction you give to different parts of your imagination, and how that gets affected by alcohol or ayahuasca or whatever.
So I don't know about this part, right? So there's this thing when people get drunk, right, and they do stupid things, and they say, well, it's okay because I was drunk or something, right? Like I never liked that. Like that seems like a cop out, right? But this exaggeration, right? Like if you go with the view that it's removing inhibitions, it's not an exaggeration, right? Like it's just a full expression of something that's there, right? But you're not aware of that that's you. And I think what's happening with these people is that they can't integrate that they're that person, right? So they're like they're just having these two ways, like, oh, like during the day I'm this, but when I'm going out I'm crazy. Right, like I am the crazy guy. And then you see that, right, you see that seeping in to their everyday life, right? Because like you can't keep these two things separate, obviously, right? And so like
I was
you're
just gonna
actually
say,
feeding that, right? Like that's
yeah.
you're feeding the demon. That's
Yeah. Well, that's why I'm thinking is it's kind of like it's like releasing the floodgate, or like in the case of exaggerated love or anger or happiness, it's like letting those things pile up and then just kind of dump them all at once,
yeah,
whereas
yeah, yeah.
there would be like a normal mediation where it's just like, oh yeah, like yes, I recognize that I'm feeling this way, or whatever. And you would kind of maybe hold back, but yeah, this is just kind of like completely letting loose where you otherwise wouldn't have.
Yeah. Like I know this one is like sometimes when you go to the toilet, yeah, but it's the same thing, right? It's like it's the same shit that's coming out, right? It's just like your mediation is just screwed. It's like so yeah, and and yeah, like there is a vulnerability in that, right? Because it's like you things are just acting on their own, right? And it's like the question is like who are you at that point, right? Like um because you're basically exposed to what you consider yourself, right? And like it's dictating what's happening to you.
Your identity takes a back seat.
Your reason does, yeah.
there's also yeah, in vino veritas was a old Latin saying. So
Would you explain it for the folks at home?
no, yeah, in wine there is truth is the general translation. So
Yeah, that's the truth serum, right? Like you see that in the movies, right? Like, oh man, I hate that so much, right? That they have this thing, and it's called truth serum, right? So when you put the truth serum in, they speak the truth. But a lot of people are working like this actually. Like it's really frustrating when people name things, right? And they're like, oh well, it's named that, so it like must be performing that function. It's like, well, no, that function is impossible. Like there is no truth serum, right? Like there's things that allow you to reveal truth more easily, but like there's no truth serum.
Okay, I think there's definitely a non-physical element as well. I mean, you think of also like enchantment. Like there's a certain enchantment with calling something truth serum and then literally injecting it into somebody before you interrogate them. It's just like,
Oh
okay.
yeah.
There's also a little bit of an excuse there too, where it's just like, oh yeah, by the way, here's all my torture instruments, but I'm gonna give you the truth serum first, and then there's no resisting it, so you can just tell me. Yeah, I think a lot of times people will kind of do that too, just with kind of to the point of like the seductiveness of the wine, and then also like the way that people will sometimes just interact with somebody so that they can get answers out of them, and it's like, yeah, they're just kind of like teasing that out.
Yeah, and actually, if they actually get woozy from the injection, right? Now they have something to project upon, right? So what is it? Arachnophobia. What's the thing that you're scared for diseases, right? And so like everything that you feel,
Oh,
like you're like
agoraphobia.
agor. No, that's afraidness of going outside.
Hypochondriac.
Hypochondria. Yeah.
No, yeah, okay.
So this you're projecting onto something that you would usually not even attend to, right? Like that's the whole thing, right? Like you wouldn't even attend to it. Like now it doesn't escape your attention, and you're hyper fixated on it because you think it has meaning, right? Like it's a symptom of the disease that you're obviously having, right? So you're going to explain everything in that disease, and because now you're exposed to a bunch of signals that you're not used to relate to, right? And you're processing them all through, oh, it's disease, it's disease, it's disease. Like you just end up stuck in this emerging feelings, right? And anxiety that they provide. This is so funny. So it says severe drunkenness results in losing familiar space, losing your shirt, and I wrote down losing your shit.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're shitting yourself, man. But yeah, like it's kind of like you are relating to your excrements in some sense, right? Like
I mean, if
you're
you
like,
listen to a drunk person talk, and it's just like,
yeah, they're full of shit. Yeah, so then you get to the communal level, right? And you do regretful acts, losing support to family and friend, right? Losing your work, and losing sources of income, right? So like that's like you're dressed in these things, just like Job was, right? Like he was dressed in his hedge of protection, and then slowly, right, this dress slides off, right? Like everything that supports you, that sustains you, falls away, and yeah, then you'll end up in exile, right? Like you end up unable to clothe yourself. um, and well, that's maybe a good example, right? Like how the communal scale and the personal scale interact, right? Like how the removal of the dress on the higher level removes your ability to dress properly. So I really like the picture at the bottom here. So it's in some sense it's like a snake bearing fruit, and it's like, okay, so you can you can have the fruit of the snake, which would be foreign fruit, right? It's unnamed, unknown fruit.
It's a casual bronze snake on a cross with no context in the text as well. This is one of the most interesting chapters because he puts a few elements in here and then just actually doesn't really refer to them. Like, it's very roundabout in this chapter. I remember my first time reading through it.
And then I will go to the footnote this time. And it's interesting, this word drinking, right, has a relationship to consumption of alcohol. And that's the same in German and in Dutch, right? So this is like an interesting equation. I guess with smoking, it also like became equivalent to a joint, right? Like there's a way in which I guess we can connect this to the claiming of words, right? Where people are trying to take ownership of words in their subculture or something, right? And then they get disconnected in some sense from its original purpose, right? And only participate in like a limited purpose.
Yeah, I mean, he just points to the fact that it's an extreme expression of renewal, right? So when you're dehydrated and you drink, that is a renewal. And he's just saying this is an extreme expression of that form of refreshment, right? Or refreshing. And I think for the subculture's point, yeah, I mean, they want to do something sneaky and bad without getting caught. And so they use the standard word in a way that in their context, it means something different because that's how meaning works. It's content plus context, see navigating patterns. A whole video on content plus context equals meaning. And that's actually, important because it's not wrong, right? It's just the extreme version, right? It's the outlier.
Yeah, and I like this idea about drinking while being dehydrated or exhausted or something, right? And you do see that euphoric quality, like this drunkenness, actually occur when people are drinking water, right? Because like it tastes in ways that they can't, and it fills them up in manners that they have never experienced, right? So like this whole world opens up to them, right?
And you also have the aspect of people get drunk much faster if they drink on an empty stomach, and like that, all of that stuff of like being flooded very quickly when there's not rectification or space or something like that is all right there.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that makes a whole lot of sense with the hippies, right? Like they don't have structure, and then it's easy to get flooded. So we're getting to the fermentation, right? And like fermentation is like a transitory process where you get a change of the nature, right? So like what you're having, it is changed, right? And like it's also important that that's external to the body, right? So there's an change of nature outside of the body that kind of afford a change of nature inside of the body. And then it's contrasted with bread, right? So like bread is mainly distinct in the fact that it's not liquid, right? It's like it has liquid, but the liquid is like held in space, right? In a structure. And then he's talking about that it needs to be cooked with fire, right? So that's like the in the introduction of a third agent, right? So instead of that, the wine has a more emergent change where it changes through the fermentation, but the cooking with fire is emanating, right? Like it's intentionally putting something in with the intention to change the structure, right? The space of the dough. And then it's also important to note, right? Like the bread itself, like is non-toxic, right? So that like even if the fermentation process produces alcohol after you've baked it, like it's kind of not there anymore, at least not in a relevant concentration. So he's talking about the process here, right? Submerging the flour into water, right? So that's like the multiplicity of the flour, right? Because that's like multiple particles, right? It gets bound together by the water that's put into it. And then the leavening means the adding the ingredient of time, right? And so like the leavening is it like a reorientation of the identity into the process of cooking or baking, whatever. I also want to add with the footnote, I'm just gonna like cut off Castle because I can.
I didn't even highlight that one, so well done.
I didn't either, but I was responding to your potential threat or whatever. So, but I make a lot of sourdough bread, and one of the important things to realize is that when you make bread with yeast, it takes like an hour or two. But if you make it with sourdough, it takes like 24 hours, right? Well, closer to, right? But so there's a big distinction between the process of becoming bread and also with the yeast, the rising mostly takes place inside of the oven, while that's not the case with sourdough. Like it has it's risen outside of the oven. And also, depending on how long you let it ferment, right? Like you allow the degree of sourness, right? So like it's also well, yeah. Baking is an art. Like you gotta deal with temperatures and time scales and like amount of moisture that you have, right, in relation to the size of the particles of the flour and all that stuff. So
Well,
going
one
back.
last thing on the last. I just want to mention one last thing on the last page. You have the diagram there. You have the baked bread and the fermented wine and the leavened bread in the middle, which would imply that the baked bread would be kind of implies unleavened bread, which is one of the things you use in the Eucharist. Whatever, you have the unleavened bread and the wine there, then you take both of them and.
Yeah, and when the priest consumes, he dips the unleavened bread inside the fermented wine. But then you also have the element that you're under both types, this is also like the center diagram. Under, if you receive one, you receive the other as well.
Yeah, just so the unleavened bread is like flat, right? Like it's not risen. So
Mhm.
we also
Yeah.
Mhm.
so yeah, I think that stood out to me at the first sentence here is that Noah became a man of the soil, right? So like he was kind of like a sailor in some sense, and from sailing the wild waters of creation, he's settling the land, right? And then the first action that he's doing is he's planting a vineyard, right? Which is a bunch of trees that bear fruit, right? So he's cultivating the land, I guess, right? And then the act that he does is he's making wine out of that, right? So um, like he's having that fermentary process added to the fruit of the tree, right? Like so he's not eating the fruits of the trees, he's refining it in some manner, right? And and then he got drunk, right? So he kind of got comfortable, like in his settlement, right? He's like, oh yes, I can breathe now, right? And then like he lets his guard down a little bit too much in that.
Yeah, I think, I mean, you think of the trope of like, the drunken sailor on shore and everything like that. I like the thing, but also you have there is this example of a guy. I don't know if anybody here saw West Coast Choppers, where they had that guy that has the great mustache, and he would make motorcycles on the East Coast. And he was in the Navy for like 20 years, and so he was on ships all the time. And then he settled down, opened up the bike shop and everything like that. And then now he has horrible seasickness at like the slightest bit of getting on the water. And it's like there's that thing where there's losing the support of the land, but he lost the support of the sea. It's just like,
Well, that happens, right? When you've been on sea and you go on the land, like you walk drunkenly on,
yeah.
on the flat ground. Yeah. And that is like your legs not able to support you, right? Like, um, so yeah, like I think we went over a bunch of this already as part of the story, but I think it's good to notice that in order to cover him, they carry the garment on both of their shoulders, right? So like they're acting as pillars. Um, and they're also like implicitly carrying their father's empty husk, right? Because he's not in it, right? Like he's not in the office, right? So they're maintaining it in some sense without him occupying it. If that
I think it's so important too that they're facing backwards. So again, to this point of like, there's a certain amount of wrong that you must acknowledge, but then also it's like, okay, quick glance, we're aware of the situation, and it's like, okay, we don't have to see anymore, and then we're going to kind of project the missing information without actually having to go and look for ourselves.
Right. This is a good case of more information won't help. Like, you already have all the information you need to take the action that needs to be taken. And this is why information won't help, because often you have all the information you need. More information will just make you confused or fill up your brain or take up time or all of those things, because it will definitely do all of those things. And really, you know what you need to do because you have enough of that information. And that's, this is a good example of that.
I think that's
and
also why curiosity is technically considered a vice. That it's just like, yeah, if you have sufficient information, it's just like, why are you wasting? It's again, it's also the time mediation. You are now wasting time because you're just you have enough.
Yeah, and so this idea that Noah's asleep, right, and he awakes, right? It's like, okay, so the eyes that are supervising, right, like the supervision has been taken away, right? So like, do we maintain order without the eyes upon us, or are we going to break the order, right? And then obviously, when the order reestablishes itself, it's going to notice the transgression, right? So that this transgression doesn't get hidden because it's not observed, right? Because like it's still observed in its consequences. Yeah. So cursed is Canaan, like, and like he's well, he's the one who sees nakedness, right? And like in some sense, that's just another apple, right? Like it's just he partook of another of the same apple that Adam and Eve did, just on a different layer. Uh, he got to see his origin, and like I think Shem and uh, and Japhet, they kind of redeemed Adam, right? Or they at least they're the secondaries, right? And they could have partaken of what Canaan did, but they refused to go with him, right? So it's like that's the proper answer. That even if the transgression occurred, like you don't fall into the same trap as the tempter. And Canaan is associated with science and discovery, right? So it's like the earthly aspect, um, and like that connected for me is like, okay, like the proper position, right, of this discovering, because that's what he was doing, right? Like he was discovering his father is in service, right? Like it, like uh, what's his name again? Immanuel Kant said, right? Like philosophy is the handmaiden of religion. Right? So it's like, yeah, like be the servant. Like what? Stop trying not to be the servant.
There's also there's the nosiness aspect of of the scientific discovery, where it's just like, oh, you just, I've made a scientific discovery, guys. It's just like, come check this out. It's like, no, you're not supposed to be, delving in here.
Yeah, because I can, right?
Right.
That they always say that, like, well, we have to like figure this out because we can. Because if we do, then things happen. Like,
Yeah, I also want to point out all the hierarchy going on here. So it's sort of part of my theme last night on the myth of World War II, and what we're really missing is hierarchy. It's the flattening of the world already happened. That's why the myth of World War II is possible. See my live stream for more from last night. The castle makes an appearance, so it was quite good.
was he talking about the footnotes?
No, there were no footnotes.
But
so
if there were, I would have.
This is how I fight Castle correctly. Just never the conflict never occurs. Trained in martial arts for a reason.
Did you cover them properly?
You see the proper relationship between the father and the son, and the interaction of the father and the son, and then you see that contrasted with the other two sons, and then you see in the curse and the blessing that there's a hierarchy, right? The hierarchy is established. You're cursed, you're blessed, and you're in the middle, but this is your relationship to the other two parts, right? And so you get to that fractal sense for that deep hierarchy, right? Oh, you broke the hierarchy up here. We're going to reinstantiate the hierarchy actually at a higher level, not a lower level, which is kind of interesting, right? And this is how that hierarchy is going to work. And basically, the authority for how that hierarchy is going to instantiate is just God, because of course it is. And so if If you missed that, fair enough. It's, to some extent hard to spot, but also super important. Like, you really want to have a sense for, we'll say, that aspect of the hierarchy. Is how it, and you can't instantiate or understand a hierarchy at, we'll say, one layer of analysis, right? Because they never exist at one layer of analysis. And hierarchies scale, but they don't scale in the way you expect, because what scale means is that for the same set, the rules change, right? So, right, the laws that apply to the peasant are instantiated differently to the king, like always, right? And every other layer in the middle, they're always different. And that may include punishment. And there's nothing wrong with that. But if you try to make it not that way, there is something wrong with that. And you see that everywhere, right? Like, you can sue the president of the United States. That's not a problem. You just have to wait till he's out of office. And you can't do that with anyone else in the whole country. But there's an important reason for that. And if it wasn't that way, it would break something fundamentally, right? And actually, they're trying to do that now, but it ain't gonna work. Thank goodness. And so you can see the way in which the hierarchy matters, and in which the rules aren't changing, but the implementation of the rules has to change because the scale's different.
I want to add also, with Noah at the top of the earthly hierarchy here, he has the authority to also make these blessings and punishments. And there's a certain, way in which, of course, all of them are participating in the rules that God is giving, but also there's a certain amount of God is respecting the established hierarchy below him by also making it so that Japheth is being enlarged, and that he's dwelling in the tent of Shem, and that Canaan is cursed, and everything, like all that stuff. And you can look at, this is also, like, people were very, very serious about what they would say. And you have the case of, like, Jacob and Esau, with the whole debacle with the blessings and everything like that, where it's just like, well, like, he actually can give you this blessing. And also, if he already gave it, like, he already gave it. There's a certain element of also a respect from above the person, from God above the person who's in the hierarchy making a particular decision. And even if the consequences are maybe not even necessarily ideal, like, oh, Jacob pretended to be his brother at his mom's direction and then lied to get a blessing. But it's just like, okay, it's not because he lied, he didn't trick God. It's that he's, the dad bestowed the blessing. So there you go. That's what's happening there.
Yeah, and also notice that the order is not being set by God in this case, right? The order is being set by the Father, right? But he's using God's authority. God's authority is emanating down and flowing through him all the time, and then he gets to set the order in the same way that God told Adam that he could name the animals, right? But God doesn't tell you that you can name the animals, by the way. So don't be naming animals. In fact, don't be naming anything. All right, just be safe. Use existing names. Don't be saying ridiculous things like social justice or whatever, because that doesn't make any sense and cannot be made any sense of. Right? Like, be very careful with your freaking naming, because it explicitly wasn't bestowed upon you, because you're still not Adam. I don't know what else to tell you. But you notice that the Father does have the authority to set the order within the family as the result of being invoking God's authority, right? And using his own judgment. And this is why judgment is important, but it's not universal, because his sons are not equal to him, and they can't reverse what he's doing, and they can't invoke God's authority to do it. And it's not that can never happen, right? But it can't happen here. People get a lot of confused with, well, that happened once somewhere in a land far away. And it's like, but you're not that someone, and you're not in the land far away. And this isn't those circumstances. So the fact that happened once is completely irrelevant to the situation today. And that's where a lot of people get wrapped up. But it's good to notice that he gets to set the order using the higher authority. And that's it. It's that simple. And it's not clear from these segments. I mean, I haven't read this silly bigger book. I can't remember the name of it anyway. But it's not clear that like God said, like, I give you the authority, right? Or here's what you need to do. Or in general, when dealing with this, here's the, like, none of that happens, right? Because we have free will, right? We have the ability, right? We're not like, the modern Calvinism is clearly incorrect. It's not deterministic. It's not how it works.
It reminds me, and also the importance of the fact that you have this authority because of where you are in the hierarchy is also, it's important how you wield that, because I had an example. I think it was on like the 1800s or something like that, that there was a kid that was going to probably wind up becoming a priest when he grew up older and everything. And there was a particular saint that kind of confirmed, like, yeah, this kid's going to be a really great priest. And the mom really didn't want it to happen. And she actually said, I would rather he died than become a priest. And the kid was dead within a week of some illness. And it's just like, you could say coincidence, right? But also within the context of, Noah literally just cursed his own grandkids and everything. Like, words have meaning. What you do matters, right?
Well, yeah, you could say that the curse was already there and he just voiced it, right? But, and I want to point out, right? Noah was put in the position that he was by God, right? Like he's a patriarch, right? Like he's the father of his generation as a consequence of being selected to build the ark, right? So that is an important point. The other point is that there's two patterns that collide, right? So you have the order of the sons. So you have the eldest son, which is supposed to inherit. You have the younger son, which is supposed to adhere to the elder son, right? And thereby adhere to the father. And then you have the youngest son, right? Who's the introduction of change, right? At least I think I'm correct. And like, I think that's the pattern in most stories, right? Like the youngest son is the bringer of change. This goes for King David, and I think was it Joseph as well, or like, I don't know. Anyway, there's something with that position, right? And so like you have that hierarchy in ordering, and therefore they have different offices, and they hold different offices, and then you have the reaction to the father, right? To the absence of the father's authority, right? So there's adherence to the father's authority, and there's a rejection of the father's authority, and putting these two things together sorts you, right? Like now it puts you in a relationship, right? And that's what Noah speaks out, right? Like that's the consequence of these two things interact, and thereby, right? And I think Mark was saying, well, like this is a higher level in some sense, right? Because it's a communal level, and that's because there's three persons, right? That's three persons that are in relationship, right? And Adam and Eve were one person, right? Like that's an important distinction.
Yeah, and also I just want to sort of point out, like, Noah goes through these trials and tribulations and obeys God in his instruction, right? And that is part of what gives him the head of household and the what would you say, progenitor of subsequent generations or something. I mean, that, like, what happened to him and why he was able to survive what happened is the important part to understand. He earned his position. And so before you go be thinking that you got a position because, like, why are kids and therefore I have a position, it's not that easy, right? I mean, except for Christopher, he's awesome. But in general, like if Castle did it, it would work. It is your trials and tribulations that give you that title and that authority. It's not that it's bestowed upon you by virtue of, you have the kids and therefore you're in charge. And because there are, and this is where I was talking about exceptions, there are times when this seeming hierarchy based on birth does not work in the Bible. And that is because birth is not the thing. right? You really have to understand it's the trials and tribulations and your obedience to God in the Bible that determine these things, and nothing else, nothing, zero other things, right? Now, when they're in proper alignment and things are good, then the other layers are going to follow. Like the father is going to be the strong head of household, and keep the wife in check, right? So the mother doesn't go out of control and become the devouring mother, a la Peterson, right? And when that doesn't happen, I just recently watched House of David, the first season there, very interesting, right? The wife and mother might go a little crazy, and all kinds of bad things might happen, and she might make things a lot worse, right? And so, and that also affects the children, and that's just too bad. Like, I don't, a lot of people don't get it. Like, just like with Job, sorry, bro, it's just too bad. Like, things happen, and what's important is how you deal with them, not the fact that they happened or happened to you.
Yeah, and I think when we're talking about the birth order, when it doesn't get adhered to, you have a crisis, right? Because like now you have a vacuum and you need to resolve the lack in some manner, right? So I think that's maybe the way to look at it, right? Like, okay, we want to have this expression, but like sometimes because of random reasons, like we can't, and then we have to solve it in a different manner. We have to dress it up in some sense. So I want to go to the intentions. I got this idea that the dam holding things back was there multiple times. I also connected to a shield, right? Like the armor of God, it has the shield of faith, right? Like so when you're holding on to a faith, right? Like it builds a, a space around you, right? That you're not directly exposed to the outside, right? Like it gets mediated through your faith, and that's the hedge of protection that's built um, around Job, right? It's like on the communal level, right? Like he has a bunch of people around him, right? He has his affluence, like spiritually, materially, socially, right? And that protects him from the influences of Satan, right? Like he's basically immune to them because he's properly maintaining everything. And still, the snake comes in. So I kind of like want to invite to have that perspective, right? Like, okay, like we have this space around us, and then we have our stupid ass drinking wine. So let's take those two into the reflection.
Could I actually? I'm gonna suggest something really quick. Could I be like Mark's pet beavers and suggest, since you're putting up a dam here, if we finish this chapter, we'll be done next week. I'm just saying it. I can start munching on the dam right now.
Yeah, if we run over by a few minutes here, Manuel, I think we can. I think Castle's right. We can bang this out, and we'll be really,
Okay. There's 3 more pages, bro. It's like
yeah, but
we'd definitely be
we're
done
doing,
next week.
We're doing
okay.
pretty good, man. We're doing pretty good.
Okay, we're doing pretty good. We'll keep going. So yeah, so the getting drunk is an overindulgence. And the tent is safe space, right? Like those are the two things.
Right. Well, and here we have this, the meta tree of life. I think you and I both share the reticence with the term meta. Although to be fair to Mitchell, he does use it. We'll say better than everybody else. That's or almost everybody else. And it is, again that that combination of rest and work, right, properly combined, points, in this case, points up, right? We're not, you got to pay attention to the arrows and where they're pointed, right? Where you're moving up time tree of death bad, tree of life good, and then this idea of meta tree of life. I still want to associate that back with being. I think that is an upgrade to some extent, rather than meta tree of life. But I know why he's doing it, and I'm like, it's his book, right? It's not my
Yeah,
book. It's
well,
fine.
this would have been solved, right? So first of all, like, it's a tree of knowledge of good and evil, or good and bad. So like, I don't know why he's.
Well, there's two trees, depending upon
But
translation
you
and stuff.
could say that the tree of knowledge of good and bad, or good and evil, is a branch of the tree of life, right?
Well,
Like,
well, that's what there's all kinds of dissent about whether or not it's two trees or one tree with a branch, and you could say that symbolism matters quite a bit, and I would say no, that symbolism doesn't matter at all, because it's kind of irrelevant, right? Because the implication, and I think this is why he's using the term meta here, right? And I don't personally like it, but A, it's his book, and B, it's not wrong. He's actually using it correctly, right? Which is to say, if you think of the meta tree of life as being, which is the word I would have used, of course it would have changed a bunch of things about the book, so maybe it's not a good idea, right? Which Mathieu's the expert here, not me, that's for sure. Then I think it's easier to understand, right? In other words, there's a principle above the tree of life. That's why there's a good tree of life below the meta tree of life. This is why it doesn't matter if it's a branch or a tree. This diagram actually demonstrates why that distinction, while well discussed, we'll say, and irresolvable is what I would say, it can't be resolved, is completely freaking irrelevant, because this diagram resolves it, right? By saying, no, there's a meta tree of life, and it is the combination of the tree of death and the tree of life. And what that means is that the tree of good and bad, or the idea of good and bad, exists in both places, if you want to think about it in terms of places, even though it's a little awkward, but it's appropriate because that's the material level down below, right? And that leads up to being, or the meta tree of life. And I think if you parse it that way, it's not so bad, right? And then he's using that to demonstrate that that resolution of he says it, right, to resolve the duality of the knowledge of good and bad, right? In other words, when you have a knowledge of good and bad, and you've already forsaken, in some sense, being, or you've already taken your attention off of being, that is the fall, roughly speaking, right? As you're looking at good and bad instead of looking at being, that's having mode versus being mode, roughly speaking. Then you're trapped in a duality, right? And so the rejection of the duality is something like a trinity. I'm sure it's random coincidence, nothing to do with the fact that the Trinity shows up later. But that the way of integrating this diagram to say, oh yeah, you're trying to include the mystery of death, right? Which is not actually, but is sometimes seen as the opposite of life. You try to incorporate that, and the purpose of recreation renewal, right? But it can go too far, right? And then it causes a further problem down the line, right? He got drunk on the wine and uncovered himself within his tent. And then that is not in and of itself the problem, right? It's a problem, right? It's a misstep, but it's not the problem, right? Because the problem is the youngest son actually invading his space, basically, and seeing what's going on. And you can forget all the ridiculous perverted interpretations of what else that might mean.
And I want to add, there's a great line here to that as well, that in the paragraph just below this lowest line, and it says I'm making it into a footnote. The fact that he saw him for a second could have just not been a problem if he actually covered him. And also didn't expose it. Like there's also a damaging thing of, okay, oh, I saw him naked and I covered him, but by the way, guys, guess what I just saw? You know, and it's like, yeah, you can screw that up on multiple levels, and he managed to do both, or all
Well,
three.
or even that you remember it yourself, right?
Right.
It's like because it's really hard to unsee things.
Right, but I think that, you know, the lesson there is that when you divide up or dissect the world, right, and this is obviously relevant to the whole point of the book, when you divide up or dissect the world, you actually can't determine good and bad anymore at all. It's impossible, right? Because the action, to Castle's point, of seeing his father is not bad if it's followed up with covering, right? And then it would have to be not just followed up with covering, right? It would also have to be followed up with keeping that knowledge forbidden within yourself, which means taking on the responsibility for that knowledge and knowing when, or in this case, whether to ever reveal it. And that is and nobody wants to hear that. Nobody wants to know there's a responsibility to knowledge. Nobody wants to know there's cases where you never reveal knowledge, and nobody wants to deal with forbidden knowledge, even though that's the point of the Republic, or one of the many points of the Republic is forbidden knowledge, right? But it's actually the forbidden knowledge aspect that makes this bad. He's revealing forbidden knowledge. He's not just failing to make sure nobody else encounters it, right? So again, to Castle's point, there's two problems there, and that's what makes the situation bad. So if Dad gets drunk in his tent, no one comes in and no one sees him, no badness occurs. It's magic, right? But and if the youngest son goes into the tent by mistake, sees him, covers him, and shuts the hell up for the rest of his life, no badness occurs. All is well with the world, right? So you can see it's the lack of that combination, that specific combination of these dissected or dissectable parts, that creates the good or the bad. In other words, goodness and badness are strictly always relational, and they're never apart from action, and they're never apart from the other parts, because you're already in a creation, you're already integrated with it. That already happened. Relationality is like you breathe. That's relational. It's everywhere.
So I would say it is bad in the sense that it puts a burden on you, right? And it's
It's not bad if you take responsibility for the burden. That's the whole point.
Yeah, but now you
can
come
do
with
that.
now you come with a new discernment issue, right? Like, when is it
Yeah,
okay
yeah.
to reveal this knowledge, right? It's like
Right, but again, you have to take responsibility for your actions or lack thereof. Like, people try to get around the responsibility by doing
but
nothing,
I'm
and
just
they
I'm just
can't.
saying, right? You've just introduced a complicating factor, right? Like, I would
Yes,
classify
your
that.
actions always introduce complicating factors. You know what else introduces complicating factors? Your lack of action also introduces complicating factors, because, you know, you can't step in the same river twice. Why? Because the river moves. No, because the river moves and you move. Well, why is that important, Mark? Because the world is moving. There is no neutral state to the world. The world is changing all the time. And that's why inaction doesn't always, but certainly can create a worse situation than action. And
Yeah,
that is
I'm
important.
not disputing that, but like, that doesn't negate the burden. But
No, it doesn't. It just states the burden's universal. It's there either way. It's just a different burden, right? There's a totally different burden going on.
yeah, okay, but like, maybe it's like one burden falls inside the structure and the other burden falls outside the structure, right? Like that.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, people see for lack of access to forbidden knowledge as a burden. Like, that's one of the great sins of today,
Yeah, well,
is that
yeah.
people are seeing their inability to access data, information, knowledge as a burden upon their soul, because they honestly believe that if they had that information, either they could do something with it directly, which is almost always completely false. Usually they're lazy and incompetent and unskilled anyway, completely incapable, right? Or they could do something with that knowledge, information, or data, and pass it along to somebody who's not useless, incompetent, and incapable, right? But that's also false, because you pass it on doesn't mean anyone's going to do anything with it, even if they can. And there might be good reasons for that, by the way. But see, they see that as a burden, and so these are the types of people that would always go in the tent because they feel the burden either way. And fair enough. I mean, maybe it is a burden. Like maybe Dad's been in the tent for a long time and you don't know. I remember distinctly there was one day where our friend, because there was a little bit of drinking involved. I mean, I don't drink, so didn't affect me. But he had been asleep for at least 12 hours. And so we were a little worried, and we don't want to go into his room. But it just turned out that this is an old Victorian triple decker in Allston, Massachusetts. And above the door, there's a window, right? But it's above the freaking door, right? We were like 12-foot ceilings in this ridiculous house. It was gorgeous. And so we had to get like a freaking ladder and go scale the ladder and look and make sure he was still breathing, right? But we didn't want to go in the room, right? But we had the ability, right, to check on him. And so we took on that, but he was asleep for like 14 hours, something completely ridiculous. We actually thought he might be dead because that happens, right? So, people drink, they have problems when they're drinking, they don't sleep on their sides. Or even if they do, that might not work, by the way. So yeah, it's not 100% clear that never looking in the tent is also the right answer. It's just that, again, there's a burden either way, and you have to take responsibility for that burden because you were born into the world, and there's just burdens all over the place. Sorry, I mean, it sucks, but also like join the club. Like it's not, you're not different from anyone else in that aspect.
Would you say a burden in the hand is worth two in the bush?
No, because I'm not you,
No.
so I wouldn't say that. You can say that.
I did.
And we can all be worse off for it.
Just add it as a footnote, and let's just not attend to it.
Did somebody say footnotes? I think we're getting close to the bottom of this page.
Excellent. I support the footnotes.
So I wanted to point out, right, like, so Ham, he's now classified as the father of Canaan, right? So there's something with inheriting this awareness, right? So like when you have an awareness of your origin, like you're gonna behave in a certain manner, right? Like you're gonna integrate that in your identity, and that's gonna trickle down into the preceding generations, right? And like we were actually praying about generational curses, right? It's like there's ways in which you're carrying things in a manner in your family. So I had this amazing video about like not hunting dogs, but guard dog. No, not guard dogs, but the leading dogs, which are shepherd dogs. There we go. So these shepherd dogs, they were shepherding ducks, and there was white ducks and black ducks, and they were two of them, and they were capable of separating the white from the black ducks. I was just looking at that, and I was like, just completely blown away, right? And I just shared this with my family, and the first thing my dad said was, yeah, those are shepherd dogs, blah, 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 right? And I'm like, well, congratulations, and just completely destroying the enchantment by flattening it in an explanation, right? And I was like, okay, this is my world, right? like this is my inheritance. And then like everything that I offer up gets smashed flat.
Yeah. Welcome to the myth of World War II. See my video last night. Yeah. Yeah. And that is and our people don't realize explaining things is the opposite of enchantment. So if you want to remain in an enchanted world, be careful what explanations you seek and which ones you get and what they end up being. Right. So usually best to let somebody else engage with them and take responsibility for them so that you can just get the explanations that are actually useful and not the ones that just disenchant the world to no good effect.
Well, the effect is that you have this embodied, right? Like this is the way that you deal with things because that's the only way that you know, right?
Well, yeah, the effect of hearing explanations that are unhelpful to participation is that it just flattens the world and forces you to flatten the world because it changes your attention. And so this is why I tell people, like, you got to be real careful with what you engage in on the internet. And of course, I have videos about that on navigating patterns. So a recent one, in fact, which is quite nice. The fallacy of Sabine Hassenfelder, which is just a good example of why censorship should be more prevalent, especially on YouTube.
And you can, to go back to my analogy of going up to the river and not being willing to cross it, right? Like that's what an explanation is, right? Like, okay, I explain the river as this to myself and maybe to you even, right? And it's like, and like now I'm invested in enchanting you in my explanation, right? Because if you're going to cross the river in contradiction to my explanation, then I can't maintain my explanation, right? Because you've proven me false, right? So like they actually have an invested interest to like keep you low, right? Like to not let you stick out your head above the grass. And um, with that, right, it's like you can see it because I've been watching debates and stuff, and you can see in the attitude of people, right? Like how flat are they making what the other person says, and you can just see the space for potential, right? And the resulting violence, because that's what it reduces to, right? Because if you're no longer able to enchant the other person, like the only option that you have is to be violent towards them, right? And then they dress up this violence as debate, right? And it's like, well, we're having this meta position where we can shake hands after we're done, and it's like, yeah, but like you didn't do anything, right? Like
Yeah.
you preach to the choir, like that's literally what you do.
Explanations are limiting, right? And disenchanting. And the propositional tyranny that John Vervaeke talks about correctly in some sense, incorrectly in others, is the disenchantment of the world. Those are the same thing, right? Because when you lose enchantment, you only have propositions left, right? And they tyrannize you because they flatten the world with their silly explanations for things that don't need explanations and shouldn't have them. And you need explanations for some things, right? But you just have to recognize it's a trade-off and there's a limit there.
Yeah, and that ends up in war.
It's where like I see a lot of people go and they reference the works of like Thomas Aquinas, who is really good, and he basically like monopolized a particular, like a large swath of theology. But one of the things is that he flat out said, like, yeah, this is for beginners. And I've mentioned that to people, and they're like, what do you mean his stuff is so complex? And it's just like, right, but because it's explanations. Like, you look at how he spent his time. It's like he was writing songs, and people said that he was absolutely delightful to be around because he had like a childlike simplicity. But when you read on paper, that's not what you get, because he's explaining stuff and he's doing it very well. But also, like, an angel told him to stop writing because he had done enough, and he was just like, great, he had other stuff to do, people to talk to, songs to write, it's just like not a problem.
I need to meet that angel.
Yeah, and then you notice later on in the text, right? Within his tent suggested he was secretly delving into the mysteries, right? So there's the forbidden knowledge. And the knowledge is the proper appropriate layer of analysis, which is the Father is delving into these mysteries, right? And there's no shame or problem with him doing that. But there is a shame or problem with the youngest son engaging with it, or even the two older sons engaging with it. And in the relationship and the way the relationship ends up coming to be, that's where the good and the bad is. It's not in the act, it's not in any of the dissected parts, and it's not in the explanation of it, right? It's actually in the totality of the actions themselves as the result of the final cause.
Yeah, I want to add one last thing to this page is the earthly aspect, right? The fleshly aspect is the aspect having trouble with faith, right? Like it's because in some sense faith is allowing things to be themselves without interfering. It's like, yeah,
It
go
looks like
ahead.
it's yeah. It looks like it's footnote time. So we have on the bottom here. I just wanted to point out that just a very precise sort of reading of this. He says the mention of wine closely follows the laws against drinking blood. He doesn't say that it fails to break or anything. He's saying it closely follows. You were like right on the edge of where the prohibition is and where it isn't. So I just wanted to make that distinction. And then also just leading into the next page, that when we see these diagrams, it's also, there's a decent mapping geographically to where their descendants wound up settling in relation to the continent.
Yeah,
And
and I think the bottom there, right? The ham, to your earlier point, Manuel, is associated with the youngest son going into the unknown, right? And maybe incorrectly, but that's where he goes, right? And he is subject to the other two.
and I think like to look at this picture, you might be like envisioning a tube, right? So like it's a temporal tube. So the inside is like, I don't know, like the establishment of the next ring. I think like rings of trees maybe like a good way to envision that too. Um, so yeah, I don't know if I like this way of describing it, right? It's like seeing your father naked is, well, he's not the ideal, right? So like there is a sense, like I actually was talking about it this week, where like you realize that your parents don't have the answers, right? And um, you can describe that as a discrepancy between heaven and earth. But yeah, like I don't know, like yeah, in some sense, right? Like the implementation, right, or the representation of the heavenly Father in your father, right? Um, is lacking, is sinful, right, or is incomplete. Uh, I don't know. It's that's necessary discrepancy, but um, yeah. So when we're going here, it says Ham failed to cover it properly, right? And like I don't know if the covering is the issue. Um, I guess.
It's not, again, it's not by itself. It's the seeing and the not covering. It's both. Like you can't
Yeah, yeah.
separate these things out.
I was trying to think if there's an avoiding of covering, right? It's like no, you have only two options: either you cover it or you expose it. So it's like,
Well, it's not even covering, because covering's insufficient. You have to properly cover. It's not, like, even covering wouldn't work. Like if you throw a sheet on him, like that doesn't work. Like it's very specific, like that. And this is where people get confused, because we live in this symmetrical world where people are just swapping things side to side because they're dualists and they don't really realize it. And it's like, no, it matters. It doesn't, the covering isn't the problem. It's the proper covering that's the problem. It's much more complicated than people would like to believe, because we're so scientific. We just keep cutting things up and saying we can just swap parts and do things and combine the word social injustice and actually make a point, which is impossible, right? And stupid things like that all over the place because we think that's how it works. But actually, the hierarchy, right, is the thing that makes the proper, right? You can't have proper without hierarchy, and the hierarchy is just really deep.
Yeah, and I think that's the part that I was pointing at, right? Because like what the other two sons are doing, right, is they're adhering to the hierarchy. They're adhering to the principle of honoring your father, and the covering is like added onto that, right? Like it's a consequence of having the proper reference instead of an action that is taken with the purpose of covering.
Right. One way to think about that, which is a terrible way, but we're stuck with the people that we have. John Vervaeke talks about combinatorial explosion. So it just turns out randomly for no apparent reason at all. It's not like we're born into an ordered creation or anything, or maybe we are. It just turns out that the answers to questions that when you divide things into parts become combinatorial explosion is actually very easy because a proper understanding and appreciation of a hierarchy already implies the proper covering and the not looking. Like it's all built into that so that you don't never encounter the combinatorial explosion that science has put you in or thrown you into, right? It never even occurs if you just have proper relationship to hierarchy, which, if you want to think of it this way, not that I particularly like people thinking of it this way, that's how I do what I do, right? Proper relationship to hierarchy. I don't need to know the specifics. Sorry, guys. I just don't, right? I just need to know the relationship to hierarchy and everything else just fits and bang. I can do all kinds of wacky things that look like I know about all these things that, no, it's all patterns. Once you know the patterns, you understand the hierarchy, all of this stuff becomes abundantly clear to you without information, without knowledge. And in some cases without even direct experience, although be very careful with that.
I think one of the things that just amazed me is like, as a citizen, you have the duty to know the law, and it's like, what are you talking about? Like that's impossible. Like that's just physically impossible.
Then you wouldn't need lawyers either, yeah, or
right,
courts, yeah,
right. But like that's doable, right? If the law is properly following hierarchy, but if it's not, right, and that's the problem that we're running into.
Well, and
It's like,
if you make the differentiation between the law of God and the law of man, it's very doable. Because generally speaking, if you follow the law of God, you're never going to run into a problem with the law of man at all. And there are some exceptions to that because it turns out we're imperfect or something, and our implementations are imperfect on top of us being imperfect.
do we need mercy, Mark? Is what? No.
Yeah. Right. But see, so, but actually, in fact, if you just follow the law of God, the law of man is less of a problem for you. It doesn't solve other men from tormenting you. In the same way, nothing saved Job from his fate, right? But at least you're right with God. So, like, whatever.
Okay. So here, right, like enlarge Japhet and let him dwell in the tents of Shem. And I thought like the tents of Shem are like emerging from like the heads of the owner, right, of the patriarch, like they're holding up the covering, right, and like you get to either be under that covering in that hierarchy or not.
Yeah, it's certainly setting up the hierarchy in terms of quantity, which is appropriate. You can't say, oh, quality is all that matters. It's not all that matters, right? But quantity doesn't explain anything for you. It has all kinds of problems when you deal with, even if you just deal with quantity first, that's already wrong. It's quality that emanates from above that you need to deal with first. But yeah, it's just saying that there is a quantity and that it is significant, right? The fact that there is a change in quantity throughout the layers of the hierarchy is actually important, right? Because one person has to make the decisions ultimately. And that's so well known that we have a president in case of war. That's how the U.S. functions. Like, there's other functions, but like, that's why they wrote it down, guys. I'm not making it up. You can go look for yourself. That's one of the many reasons, right? When things need to be resolved that cannot be resolved by a committee, we have one head. And that head is not supposed to function unless those circumstances are met, by the way, by and large. Say no to executive power, but it's too late for that now, so we have to correct it. So let's hope it gets corrected.
So I'm gonna cut off Castle again. So it's interesting, right? Like that the analogy is between shoulder and mountain, all right? And in some sense, like the mountains are the shoulders that carry the world or something, or like carry the covering of the world. That's more correctly. But yeah.
Mm-hmm. And the people in the center are like these shoulders have them covered, right? Like that if you can stand between, you got the negative, the double negative shoulder, and then you've got the positive shoulder. If you can stand between those and stay properly oriented, like and not go too far to the right hand or the left, then you're covered.
And do those shoulders have angels on them?
They could be represented by them.
But I got you covered, Castle. I got you covered.
Yeah, thank you. I like the. I know one other thing I wanted to cover here is the last footnote.
You wanted to cover it, or you wanted to discover it?
We're about to find out. So you have the transfer of inheritance that's also happening is also a process of refinement. So because Canaan is the last son of the youngest son that is inheriting the lowest in terms of southernmost land, that you have because of the increase of Japheth, you actually wind up seeing just kind of like the person who has very little losing even that, and then the person who's at the top is receiving even more. But then because of that, everybody on the entire spectrum going up is also receiving Canaan stuff, essentially, because he's now the servant of actually everyone. And so yeah, it's unfortunate, but it's also it's the same thing as like the raising matter diagrams that we saw before.
Yeah, so going here, I have this hosting of Japheth connected to the separation of church and state. And I think when you look at the picture that's displayed here, right, like that would be a picture of the tent of Hashem, right? And there's Japheth who has this mediation with the heavenly, right? And Ham is mediating with the earthly, right? And they come together in Shem, who's on top, right? And I think having this separation of these two aspects coming together in the head, right, is that separation of church and state. So there's just things that have to do with the bottom and things that have to do with the top, and they have to come together in a singular entity that is making decisions as the head.
Yeah, the idea of separation as such is super important, right? Because right now we're living in this universalization nonsense. Everybody wants everything to be equal and whatnot. It's like, no, that destroys the world. Don't do that, right? And so there is a separation. I do wish that this had a triangle beside it with the hierarchy expressed, so that it was a little bit easier to understand that you're looking kind of top down at it.
Well, I think Castle's icon was a good representation of that, actually.
Yeah, yeah, it was, but it's not. We don't We don't have it here. Part of the problem. Yeah, I mean, RJ used to make this point all the time. Like, it's important to understand how these are oriented in 3D space, and that's not always made clear, because the point that's being made is very specific. And I think there's somewhat of an assumption on Matthieu's part that you kind of got the 3D space aspect, but as I think you're well aware, Manuel, people do not understand that 3D space is not optional, right? Like, everybody is like, well, really, in 3 dimensions. I'm like, everything's
Well,
already in 3 dimensions. Like,
well,
why
actually,
would you say
Mark,
that?
like I think the issue is that they don't believe in Shem, right? So they don't believe that
Right. No, you're right. That's
office.
they don't believe. Well, they don't believe in Shem, and they don't believe in Ham, and they think everybody's JPEG. Basically, everybody gets in the middle, right? And then they try to they try to raise up JPEG, right? They try to lower Ham, and they berate Shem, right? It's just right, and then or worse yet,
sometimes they
think,
go ham.
right, or worse yet, they kind of think they're Ham, or that everybody should be Ham, and therefore they're raising up the JPEG and lowering the Shem to make everything equal, right, and universalize the world, because those are the same thing, by the way. And yeah, there's no lines, there's no boundaries, there's no borders, right, and that flattens the world, and then you get the myth of World War II, and you destroy everything. And could you please stop? Because we can make the world better. We can. It's easy.
Yeah, thanks for hammering that down.
All right, that's enough hamming it up, guys. So something I
That
wanted
was
to point out.
ham-fisted, man. Like,
Yeah. Let me.
Orc
So
smash.
ridiculous. So something that I was thinking with this as well is, so you've got, this is a decent depiction as well of the thing of, you've got the leader, and then above him you've got authorities and experts, right? And then you've got the people below on this diagram as well. You've got sort of the strong core, but also this is a sort of representation as well as of in the case of Noah, like Noah would be in the center, and then you've got like heavenly authority above him, and then you've got the children below him. Like, you have that mediation aspect of the leader is actually in the center and like out in front, essentially, and that's sort of what's happening there. But and also to add to that, the name Shem actually means name or identity or something like that. So you have the guy that names stuff in the middle, and he's got the heavenly authority above him, because I think Japheth is actually also his older brother, and Ham is the younger brother. So you do have the thing that he is also in the middle in terms of timeline, and then he's mediating between the two of them.
Yeah, so he's framing it as a failed attempt. I would describe it as a mediated. So he's mediating the relation between good and bad. You could say that failed, right? But like, who are you to judge, right? Like, are you gonna look at him naked? So yeah, there's just like, yeah, this mediation is imperfect, right? Like, there's a reason that wine is involved.
Yeah, I think he's not stating it failed. He's stating it's not clear in the story, but it probably failed or might have failed. And I think that's all he's expressing there. He's not making it clear.
I mean, if it failed at like a short time scale, and then you can work it out over time. So.
Well, you can say it failed in the sense that it got interrupted, right? So in some sense, we don't know, right?
Well, yeah, it might not have gotten interrupted for Noah. We don't know. I think that's it just doesn't say, what happened. I mean, he relates it to the wine. And so, maybe this attempt to resolve this duality through the wine failed, because maybe that can never work. I don't know. right? Or maybe it can work, right? It's just not clear, and that's okay, because the point of the story is again the hierarchy and the mediation and all the things we've been talking about, not the, it's not directly talking about that part of the story, which is okay, right? Or at least it's not talking about that part of the story in a way that can be explained or resolved. It's talking about that part of the story in a way that this is what happened. This is a normal part of being human, and it doesn't necessarily reflect, it doesn't necessarily impact your relationship with God, because he still has the authority from God to make all the things happen. It's not like his failed attempt, if it did fail, had any negative impact on his faith or his relationship or his authority or his ability to do things. Then that, I think, is super important to realize, that because it gives you a sense for, if you're supposed to be trying to do something, even if you fail at it, that as long as everything else is proper, there's no penalty to you at the layer above you, we'll say, right? And that's not, there's nothing wrong with that.
I want to suggest that on the communal scale, it was resolved to some degree for a certain period of time. So whatever was going on interiorly inside Noah, as far as the fermentation and everything like that, the fact is that the playing out of this duality of good and bad is also rectified by the assertion of the hierarchy, the mediation, the kind of changing up of the resources of Ham up into the other brothers, to the point where ultimately, like, Canaan is not completely estranged, and Ham is not ultimately, like, he's not put to death or anything like that. The issue is actually resolved for a time. Once they go and they spread out, the implications and, like, the roots start to set in, and you got wars and stuff like that. But before they start, before everything starts kind of descending down the mountain, literally, you actually, it's temporarily rectified, at least for the rest of Noah's life.
Mm-hmm. So I want to mention a couple of things, because first of all, like, he did with the ark properly give something to the next generation. And then in this side of the story, he improperly communicated something to the next generation. And I think if you flip the coin that Mark was looking at, right, in some sense, it's also a story about, it doesn't matter whether you exceed or not, because you're going to have effects on the people around you that you can't control. Right? So even if you're successful in manifesting whatever you're manifesting, you're still having to deal with the fact that, like, there's others who can't deal with you.
Yeah, that goes back to the world is always moving, and you're still in it and related to it, and whether you take an action or not, there's still effects, and you're not getting around that responsibility for those effects.
Yeah, and so, like, the cascade of that occurred, right? The resulting dynamic, they reflect back on Noah, right? Because, like, now he's having to be the judge, right? And like Castle said, like, he's having to curse his son's descendants. So yeah, that's not a nice one.
And immediately after this account of Noah here, you go into the genealogies, whatever, of the descendants of Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And the descendants of Shem is where you get Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. Mm-hmm. So they are, direct descendants of Shem here.
Yeah, and I gotta. Yeah, so it says that this is the story of the fall of Noah, right? And like, Noah wasn't fallen yet, right? Like, when this all happened, right? Because else you can't fall.
Well, it's the story of the fall with Noah's 3 sons replacing Adam's 3 sons, not Noah. Noah doesn't fall in this instance.
Yeah, but I was trying to make the connection with the digestion of uh, of the wine, right? Because that could have led to his fall, right? But, that was
Yeah, again, he doesn't seem to lose favor with God, right? And so I think that it's the recapitulation of the patterns is going, we'll say, one layer down to the sons to see how the sons interact with, we'll say, a direct contravention of God's commands with no contravention of God's commands, right? In other words, the sons are now responsible solely for their fate in some sense. Whereas with Adam, that's not, it's not, right? But you have to see that, you have to see both, you have to see that unfold in both ways, right? And so, I mean, you could say, well, you drank wine and got drunk, and that was a fall or something, which is fine and fair, right? But it's not an inappropriate fall. He wasn't commanded not to get drunk and not to drink, for example, right? And the implication is, had he been able to do it in the privacy of his own tent, he might have discovered what he was looking for. It's not even that the looking for the thing was necessarily bad. It only would have been bad if other, sort of other people did it.
yeah. So to conclude, I want to highlight the word discover, right? And like how it, in some sense, has a negative connotation in the sense that you're inviting something alien when you discover something, and so you kind of like need to double check before before you go ahead and discover anything.
Yeah, it's the idea of forbidden knowledge and the interaction of, maybe you shouldn't know that, right? In the same way that if your 4-year-old asks where babies come from, that discovery needs to be dealt with carefully, right? But that goes all the way up into your adulthood, right? Like if you try to tell somebody how to program software in Rust with silly things like monads, completely unnecessary and should be abolished, they'll use them inappropriately because that's effectively forbidden knowledge for the beginning programmer. Like, it's not that hard. I mean, this goes everywhere, right? There's forbidden knowledge in the Bible. There's forbidden knowledge in Plato, and again, Plato deals with it explicitly and says, like, this is a problem that the perfect city cannot resolve and therefore must accommodate, right? And how do you do that, right? And so, yeah, I mean, and if you don't have a sense of hierarchy and your place, you will try to discover or uncover everything. And as the story tells us, uncovering is bad, right? You need to properly cover things.
And we all inherently know this, because if you want to like put your hands in like a dark hole in the ground, tell me how bad you want to discover things.
Yeah, just put your hand in a dark room and see what you imagine, right? Peterson's little trick. It still works. Doesn't matter what age you are, it still works.
Swimming in murky waters, man, I hate that. Like, it's so horrible. Anyway, enough. What is it? Damn it! My pun run out. It's time to make an end to this. So yeah, I do think that this boundary, right, like this space that is kept by something, and something is being kept out, right, without our direct interference, right? Like, I think that's the essential part, um, and the affordance that comes from that, right? So there's something like, oh, I don't have to worry about these things, right? Like, so for example, you make a fire, you don't have to worry about being cold, and a lot of things are enabled because of that, and like we're actually constantly in stuff like that, but I feel like we're not looking at it in that manner. So like I want to invite that reflection, right? And also maybe connect that to nakedness, right? Like so we're just like Job having this hedge of protection. Like what if it falls away, right? Like are we properly maintaining the dikes? So let's see each other on the other side. Well, who wants? Man, we're going hard. Who wants to close this out? I guess I'll go first because you're always so willing to go. So I was actually thinking that if we have this space, right, like just let's just take the tent, right? Like uh, people have to maintain that, right? Like it's not something that just exists, right? Like it exists as a consequence of your participation in it, right? And since it's mediating things with the outside, right? Like there's influences of time that occur, right? And so let's just say that the tent rips, right, or whatever, and like the man like has to find like a new covering, right? Because and in that covering he might do an upgrade, right? Or like he might add something, right? And then everybody in the tent is now positively surprised, right? Because that was not where their attention was, right? So like a miracle occurred in their midst, right? So that there's something really powerful where the good can occur in a way that you don't have to care about it, but you can still partake in it. Um, So the other thing is that, well, we already talked about this with the bridge, right? But like also with the tent, life takes a shape, right? Like you're gonna have to participate in certain resources, right? And like you're gonna have to have patterns, disciplines around them, right? So like that make gives your lives a form, right? And lastly, I was thinking about that it's also necessary for trust, right? So there's this like reliability that occurs, right? But also this reliance that doesn't get betrayed, right? And so like I was thinking about church, right? And so like we're going to church, right? And like nobody really knows what's going to happen. Like my church is a little bit different than some churches, right? But the good is manifesting. And the good is manifesting as a consequence of everybody coming together and somehow bringing that up. And there's a magical quality to that, right? Where um it's independent of what's happening. You can trust that what is happening is going to produce the good. And I think that's also really important, and a thing that we're kind of missing a lot in the world.
Yeah, I think I want to add because I like the point about the trust and thinking about this aspect also of the sort of the nakedness or something has just a discrepancy has just arisen and now there's an uncovering on something. This thing of being able to and maybe having built relationships so that you don't have to do all of the covering yourself, so that being able to, I guess, having put in the time to participate in such a way that when you can't cover yourself, then other people will try to do it for you, even if they do it poorly. Like at least there's a certain effort that's being made there, and that in itself can actually even compensate for someone actively trying to manipulate or take advantage of that compromise. And so just kind of that of being able to have people that you can trust, or also being willing to kind of put that sort of level of trust, even if the person is maybe not. In the case of Noah, for example, like having his sons are not on his level, like just they're just flat out not. But that he can kind of trust the people that are below him or descended of him to kind of cover what he can't.
Actually, that physically happened to me today in church. Like I got covered with a blanket. And
Nice.
and that's the thing that they do regularly, right? It's like, okay, like if you're in a compromising position or whatever, right? Like you don't have to worry about your nakedness because you're covered by other people. And they're anticipating that, right? So it's kind of like
That goes back to things that have come up before in previous chapters about clothing and being properly dressed and how you attend to that, which also scales out to like where you live, the tent or your room or whatever. Jordan Peterson's Clean Your Room is relevant here, properly dressing the area you live, which also scales up to the next chapter talking about the temple that we're going to do next week. So,
well, and
Last
that's
week, next week, I'm
addressing
amazed.
things, right? Like if you dress up your room, you're addressing problems in your life. So, yeah, thank you all for watching.
Yeah, thanks. This is great. Thank you, Castle. Excellent mediation.
Thank you guys.
Thank you on for walking on the bottom of the page.
Yeah.
Following in
Try not
Matthieu's
to let my footnotes
footsteps.
fall asleep, but I really am.
Oh my god. Okay. I gotta put my foot down. Okay. Thank you all for watching. See you next week.